Thank you for joining us there in the screen and here. We have 7 people here in Hyytiälä. And how many there's online? Markéta and Sjef and Tuuli and Ulla and Paola. So welcome to this remote walking tour to the SMER2 station. That's in Hyytiälä, the forestry field station. This forest field station is 100-year-old station, belongs to the University of Helsinki, and they train the forestry scientists and forest managers of the country since already 100 years ago. And then the SMER station was started in 1995. You were seeing a little, I'm sharing my screen with a map that you can see an aerial view of the station. This walking tour is part of a project we have that's called Open Forest, and we are kind of looking into the relationship between the data, environmental data, the science, and the knowledge that's been made in a place like this, and climate change, and other kinds of data and other types of knowledge that might augment or help us understand the kinds of practices that happen here. So we're collecting for that stories and all kinds of data. So in the map that you see here, there's already some of them around some of the trees and around some of the creatures. So we're asking you to, while we walk, to pay attention to some of the creatures you would see and meet. And then maybe you would like to share a story or offer a story to the creatures. But we'll talk about that later. We can concentrate on the actual space over there. So from Sjef's screen, you can see the 35 flux gaze mast. And from Markéta's, Markéta's also showing it. This is the entry of the SMER station. It has a couple of containers that has some of the servers and some of the instruments, measurement instruments, chunking numbers over there. Like I said, the station was built in 1995 first by a group of physicists, chemists, and forest ecologists from University of Helsinki that wanted to start a long-term ecological monitoring and collecting data about a typical Finnish forest. So this is a stand pine. That means it's a managed forest. It was established in 1962. The forest was planted after light burning and soil preparation. And in 1995, the scientists decided that this would be a good place to start collecting this kind of data, because the floor in this part of the forest is quite concave, and there's only one point through which the water leaves the forest. So it was easier to put water catchments to start, measure. They know exactly, for example, how much water comes to the forest and how much water leaves the forest. So we can now start walking probably to the part that's most instrumentalized in the forest. They have calculated they are collecting around 2,600 data points. That includes measuring aerosols, flux gases, photosynthesis, radiation, sap flow. This is so-called Huttu cottage, and that includes a lot of the gas measurements. They have pipes along the forest because they are measuring, of course, carbon concentration and photosynthesis, and so they need to sometimes inject gases and measure them out. So the main interest of this station is to follow the relationship between the forest ecosystem and the atmosphere. So they do lots of aerosols, volatile organic compounds, lots of measurements between how the ecosystem interacts with the atmosphere. That's why also the towers and the vertical dimension are very important. You would see from Markéta's screen the path. So you cannot walk outside of this path because there's all kinds of tubes and things in the soil.
How big is the entire area?
I think it's 7 hectares.
7
yeah.
hectares. So about 35,000 trees.
Yes. So the station. This is the first point. I think you could see briefly from Sjef's screen. There was or in Markéta's screen. There's a table there in the forest, which is the work of artist Agnes Meyer-Brande. She was an artist in residence in the station in 2015, and she produced this tea-lima tree station. So you can have a tea with a tree and talk with them. And there's a webcam also following. There's a live stream from the station. You can see at any time how the tea-lima tree station is working. Is there somebody having a tea with a tree? She has also made a couple of workshops in the station and worked with the scientists in the microclimates of teacups and the relationship with trees. A nice piece of work. Yeah, I think we can continue the walk. So this is mostly pine, Scott pines, Mänty, Metsämänty in Finnish. That's the most typical Finnish trees, and it's a good representative of a Finnish forest that's managed. And that's why if you want to understand how climate change affects Finnish forests, you would have to do it in a forest like this, because I think 70% of the forests in this country are managed forests. So they are used also for harvesting in the diverse degrees of intensity, of course. And now we are approaching the mast. This is probably one of the most expensive pieces of equipment in the station. It's a 180 meters tall mast. It measures every 5 and 10 meters of different kinds of measurements, everything from temperature, wind direction, fluxes, and aerosols that come both from this forest and some of the managed forests that surround the station. And it was it was not first built in this place, but and then it was moved here. But it was one of the first things they have installed in the area. So beside the mast, there are 2 water catchment areas for soil and water measurements. And then there's 1 tower for fluxes, 1 tower for tree physiology that we will visit later. And there in the back, that wooden cottage that you see, or you saw briefly, it's the data hub of the station. There's most of the servers are there. The data is collected there before it's put on the cloud, because all the data from the station is open data. And then you see this small tree that you see in Sjef's screen. It's called the carbon tree. It's also a work of an artwork by Terike Tapeoja. It's called Carbon Tree, and you can visit there's an interesting visualization that tells about how much carbon sink this particular tree is producing. And we can get a peep inside the data hub from Jeff's screen. You can see some of the computers and some of the oxygen and other gases. Cylinders are there, lots of cables around. I think from Markéta's screen, you can see the side of the, soon you would see the side of the cottage where you can see all the cables coming in from the instruments. It's an interesting site. It's a repurposed summer cottage. And from Sjef's screen, you see one of the chambers. They also have a lot of measurements, like in the understory. For they close depending on how they are set, every 30 minutes or 10 minutes they close, and some gases are injected and some measurements are made. There's most of the vegetation are bilberries, polucat, and I can't remember what was the name of the grass, hay grass, I think. There's some animals around the station, but we are told that they don't come very often, moose, for example, because it's very noisy because of the servers. But there's lots of mice and insects, which are a little bit of a nuance once in a while, because they get stuck in the instruments and you have to go on and clean them. And so this is the part where most of the water catchment are. In some point, there's also a dog house that is used to cover one of the pumps for the water catchment.
Is it that the data collection is more or less automated?
It's mostly automated.
Is there someone permanently in the site?
There are a couple of technicians and one of the I don't know if they live permanently in the station, but certainly they live close enough, and there's always somebody on the station. But for example, the data manager lives in Helsinki, and he says that sometimes he, if there's need, he would go from Helsinki. And when we have interviewed, for example, one of the researchers before, she has a webcam on her server, so she can see from Helsinki if the server is down. Then she goes. That's like she has like this kind of meta observation of her observation instrument. And now you see one of these birch in Markéta's screen. It is one of the ones that have some sensors. It has like a white tutu dress covering the sensor, and this kind of measures the dilatation of the trunk of the tree during the day and at night. And this, all these, they are all connected and then go to the data hub. And then from Markéta's screen, you could also see one of the towers. This is the these are the ones that are measured. These are 4 trees, and they are measured different kinds of data from them. It's funny because the 4 trees that are here, they were given names of the 4 Finnish partners, the president's partners. So they are Telervo, Sylvi, Jenny, and Pentti. There's 3 pines and 1 birch. And Markéta
is Pentti the birch.
Pentti is I think Jenny is the birch.
Birch, yes.
And so Sjef is climbing up the tower, and Markéta is showing the dog hut actually now. So Sjef is taking us up to the canopy, and Markéta will stay down. If you have questions, you can ask at some point. You can see the mast, how high it is. I think they have. Yeah.
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Is data collection run all year round?
Yes, they have.
The weather.
Weather. Yes, some instruments are turned off for the winter, but actually not that many.
Okay.
And for example, in the mast, one of the professors told that they are able to tell, for example, if there had been fireworks in Taipale from the measurements they take.
And how far is Taipale?
100 kilometers.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So collecting data since 1995.
Yes, 20. Yeah.
How much data do they have?
It's
how many terabytes?
quite a lot. It's really a lot. I was doing also some work before this with the long-term ecological research network in the States, and they have 40 years.
40
from
years.
8 different stations. So it's like massive amounts of data. Now you can see from Sjef's some of the instruments in the canopy. These are for photosynthesis. So this chamber also closes every once in a while, and there's a laser involved. It hits the leaves at certain intervals. Of course, they have to change the leaf that is there once in a while because it gets tired. Yeah. The first time I visited the station, the person that was giving the tour told, when we were seeing one of those trees with a tutu, that the tree was suffering from instrument poisoning, and that means that it had been strapped for over 2 years to the sensors, and it was not producing, of course, as good data as possible anymore. So that's also a thing that you have to change once in a while the instruments from different one. Hey, but yeah, you can see now the canopy, and Markéta is along. This, I think, gives you a good overview of the kind of place. And the forest actually also was thinned, so it was reduced in, was it 2019, I think, in the fall. Because of course, if you want to keep it as representative of a Finnish forest as it is, then you use all these kind of management practices that include cutting some of the trees. Ulla, who's here, told us yesterday that there is a couple of an artist couple working on a piece using the data, some of the emissions from before the cutting and after the cutting, to make a piece that might talk about whether the trees are crying or not when they were cut. So we'll see in the autumn a piece. Sorry, Ulla, tell.
No, it's just not maybe the trees that are falling, if they are crying. Not only that, but maybe the lucky ones who were not selected as thinned ones. So maybe they will communicate something. They are maybe talking about their loss of their kind of neighbor, or I don't know. We'll see. It's a band of weeds. They will release this sound art piece in the end of the year or something like that. So there will be an online version, but also a permanent version in the near to Smear forest in the forest as well of their work. So it's band of weeds. So it's with Kalle Harman and 3 musicians who are working on that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Ulla. So this is a good time to ask questions or clarifications if you're curious about something you saw.
Ask our creatures if you got inspired by any of the creatures that we have been showing so far. Sensors, trees, bilberries, dog houses.
Cranberries.
As well. Owls.
So what about the map data? It's like I was looking some map, it was having the trees in there. Are all the trees, like the locations on the map and the measurements and everything must be somewhere?
Actually, when we were doing this, we were asking for it. We got this data from the station. They have a table where they have mapped in a particular area, the one that we are showing, all the trees. But the sensors and which sensors are in which tree, that's not That's mapped in a different table, which we haven't found. so because I think the interest in the station is, or the research questions they are asking, they're about the whole ecosystem.
Right.
So they're not interested in specific trees.
Okay.
So that's why I don't think they've been carefully mapping, for example, all the locations of the sensors. They just know roughly where they are, and they are interested more on the overall.
Okay.
So the map that you saw in the beginning is something we have made now for this purpose with our colleagues in RMIT in Melbourne. And then we are collecting also this open data from Helsinki and Barcelona and Melbourne of the trees itself. And then we're thinking what can we do with it. But from the point of view of the station and the research, I think this, because they are thinking more in terms of the whole forest and the atmosphere, and not the individual trees, for example. There's 5 actually who have most of the sensors, and then there's, if I read correctly a table, there's around probably another 8 that are not attached to the towers, that have just some in the bottom. Yeah, so there's not that many trees which are strapped. Most of the sensors are on the soil, on the water, and in the mast.
And is the data treated as qualitative?
It's quantitative. It's quantitative.
Even though it's so little trees.
Yeah, but it's quantitative, because most of it is also and most of the papers are about the fluxes and the volatile organic compounds that the mast is sensing, and it senses from all the trees. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yes, of course.
But
Yeah.
of course, I mean, it's just a sample anyway.
Yeah, so it's quantitative because they have it for only 5 trees, but it's like every 10 minutes for 20 years.
Yes, so it's
So-
quantitative in the context of this one tree.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Cool.
But if anyone else has a question or was particularly interested in one of the creatures that we have shown,
What about
us
seasonal
know.
changes in the forest? How do you see that affecting the data that's collected and the kind of activities that we're doing? So when it's snow, when it's spring, like what happens?
For example, we have interviewed now one of the researchers that, because they have noticed certain patterns in the data that suggest that there is less snow coming, and that is affecting. So now they have a plot a little bit to the side where they have built a structure so that there's no snow going down, and they want to study more carefully what happens to the forest when we will have less snow. So based on the 20 years of data that's already kind of acquired, and there's some patterns shown about this less snow, then this is now set up to try to look at that more carefully, for example.
Has anything changed during the winter time in terms of the setup of the activities there and the sensors, or is it more or less the same throughout the year?
I think it's more or less the same, except that I've read some of the sensors, like I told Katerina, some of the sensors are turned off, but not that many. I thought there would be more, but
Most of them
are also
So
running.
it just measures the amount of
Yeah.
water and snow
Do
and
you-
wind and everything. What are those white dots in those trees?
These are marks left from the inventory when they were doing the thinning of the forest 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's just the numbers of each of them.
of the trees.
The trees that fall just naturally remain, and
They have left them there,
it's
yes.
meant to be
Yes,
completely welded.
yeah. Yeah.
Of course, unless it drops on the sensing equipment.
Yeah, now from Sjef's screen, you can see the leftovers. It's 1,621 the mantle of 21 meters. So yeah, this information is there. Yeah.
That's telling you how much carbon sink it's got?
No, it doesn't tell you. It's just the location. Yeah, but they do. I don't remember exactly what it is, but they have made the calculation of the amount of sink, carbon sinks that this particular piece of land produces.
Yeah, and also the carbon tree, which is the like very special Scots pine. Here, you can actually watch the animation of the carbon sink online. There is a website. If you actually go to the map that we have, that I shared in the chat, there is a story attached to this, to the carbon tree, that is telling all this, the information, and also has the link to the website where you see the like live data about the CO2 flux.
It would be interesting to measure how much carbon is caused by this measuring.
Yes.
You know, and the server.
How many servers are here?
Like
It's counterbalancing.
that is it even positive side with the 35,000 trees?
Yes, we will put forward this request. Maybe they have thought about it. I don't know. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, just this whole hut that is really like full of cables and sensors and I mean and servers. I also wonder what is the carbon footprint of this hut.
I think there is
part of the forest, no? So
yeah, there is I don't remember if there's solar panels in the cottage. Probably there are some. Yeah.
Can go check.
Cool. Yes. So we will be very happy if you could leave us some reflections in the map over there. And I'm gonna, you can stay online with Markéta for a little while.
Just in Zoom, yes.
Yes, and I'm gonna close now here and talk a little bit with the guests in Hyytiälä, so we don't need to stare at the screen all the time.